各位观众，大家好，欢迎大家出席第16
Welcome
届
to the
哈佛中国教育
16th
论坛。
Harvard
我
China
是本
Education
届论坛的
Symposium.
主席
I am
王
the
思颖，
Deputy Director 陶
这里
思宁.
是本届论坛倒数第二个分论坛的活
This
动现
is the
场——艺术
Education
教育分论
Through
坛。
Art panel.
艺术具有无限的包容性，
Art is
在一个个看似
inclusive.
奇怪的作品中，
In
人们
seemingly
大胆地打
strange
破了边
artworks,
界，也拓展了
we
思维的维度。
attempt to
不同的艺术
expand
表达
our
思想方式的
dimension
本
on
质，
art.
人类思维
Different
创
art
造力的延
expression
伸
tells
没有
us
边
that
界，
the
世
expansion
界有可
of
能，人
ideas
类
is
思想也
boundless.
可能自
Everything
由
is
驰骋。
possible.
下
Mind
面
can
让
be
我们欢
free.
迎艺术教育分论
So
坛的主
now
创李
let's
若一和
invite
李若曦
co-hosts
和嘉
李
宾
若
们
一
为大
and
家
李
带来
若
分享。
曦 of the Education Through Art panel.
各位屏幕前的教育探索者、艺术实践家们，大家晚上好！
Educators and
欢迎
art
来到
practitioners,
2025
good
年
evening.
哈佛中国
Welcome
教育论
to
坛
the
艺术教育分论坛的
Education
联
Through
合
Art
现场。
panel of the
我是本次
2025
论
Harvard
坛的
China
主
Education
创李若
Symposium.
曦。
I am co-host
大家
Dorothy.
好，我是主创李若一，非常
Hi,
荣
I
幸
am 李
和
若一。
大家一起共同开
We
启
are
一场
honored
充满灵
to
感与思辨的
start
艺
this
术教育
journey
课
of
堂。
inspiration
在
and
正式开始之
critical
前呢，
dialogue
我
about
也想
arts
和大家做
education.
个简单的自我
Before
介
we
绍。
officially
我目
start,
前
we'd
在俄
like
亥
to
俄州
briefly
布雅斯
introduce
大学
ourselves.
艺术管理与教
I'm
育与
working
人
on
才
my
方向的博士。
PhD in Arts
我长期关注文
Administration
化
and
政策、
Education
艺术管
Policy
理、
at the
扩散
Ohio
跨文
State
化的创
University.
新与现
I
今意义
focus
下，
on
日
cultural
常的教育分
policy,
论
arts
坛由我
management,
和
and
瑞希
public
共同负责
impacts
主持。
across diverse
背
social
后也凝
contexts.
聚了很
This
多重要
panel
的
is
成员。
initiated
我
by
们希望通
Rosie
过这
and
样的一个
me
平
and
台，
many
让艺术教
like-minded
育不仅能够
collaborators.
在课
We
堂
hope
中，
that
更
this
回到生活，
platform
回到
can
思想。
bring arts
让我们一个
education
个的充实
into life
经验里。
experiences,
大
into
家好，
reality,
我目
and
前在哈
into
佛
the
大学从
personal
事亚洲时
narratives
艺
of
术史
every
研究的
individual.
教育研究。我专注于以新媒体技术
Hello
创造
everyone,
的
I
视觉
am
代
now
表的方
researching
式
Asian
与视
art
觉逻
history
辑，
and
探索
education
跨
at
学科、
Harvard.
跨媒
My
介、
work
跨文化
explores
的人
how
文学习
digital
新舞台。
technologies can
很高兴
reinvent
今
the
天能与
expression
大
and
家一
narrative
起来
logic
认
of
识、共
humanities.
话艺术
It's my
教育的
pleasure
未
to
来。
be here today and
在论坛开
reimagine
始
the
之
future
前，
of arts
我想邀
education.
请大家一起玩一个
Before
小游
we
戏，
officially
请大
start,
家闭上
I'd
眼
like to
睛，
invite you
让
to
我数
play
到
a
3 的
quick
时候，
game.
脑海中
Close
浮
your
现
eyes.
出
When I
一
count to
个
three,
艺术教育相
visualize the
关的关
first
键词。
image that comes to
1、
mind when you hear
2、
arts education.
3。
One, two,
我们
three.
猜想到很多人的眼前出
So I
现的
guess
可能
that
是美
many
术教
people
室、
might
颜料
picture
盘，
an
或
art
者是
studio,
一个鸡
a
蛋、
palette of
达芬
paints,
奇画
or
起来的
perhaps an
故事，
egg.
几乎成
The
为艺术
tale
教育
of Da
的印
Vinci
象。
drawing eggs have almost
但今
become a
天我们
stereotype
想
of
通
arts
过创新、
education.
消碎的
But
方式，
today
一起
we
来
are
打破
here
这个鸡
to
蛋。
crack the egg.
我们今天艺术教育分论坛以艺术教育在哪里为起点，
This panel
试图在
starts
传统课
with
堂的
the
边界之
question, where
外，
does
寻
arts
找
education
教育发
happen?
生的场
We
域。
want to go beyond the traditional
我们
classrooms to
相信
explore
艺术教
its
育不仅
meanings
局
and
限自我之
dimensions.
路，
We
更
believe
是普通
arts
人理解
education
自我、
isn't
沟通
just
世
for
界的重要
artists,
途径。
it's a
本
path
次
for
论坛
everyone to
从物理
understand
空间、
themselves and
数字空
engage the
间、
world.
认知空间
This
3 面
panel will
发展，
examine three
邀请了3
dimensions,
位在上
physical,
述领
digital,
域深
and
受启迪
cognitive
的嘉宾
spaces.
们，
We have
提出我
invited
们
the
对艺
three
术教育的
experts
再想象。 它不再是
to
中心化
reimagine
的、
arts
标准化
education
的， 而
as
更是灵活的、
decentralized,
柔软的、
non-standard,
在地的，
fluid,
发生在我们
pluralistic,
真实
and
生活
grounded
经
in
历
the
中的。
place where we
带着这
truly
主
live.
题， 我
So
李若
with
一
these
策划了
questions in
本次分
mind,
论
we
坛，邀请大
designed
家
this
一起开
panel
启
and
这场
we'd
对话。
like to invite you all
接
into
下
this
来，请允
conversation.
许我隆重介绍今天
Now
出席
please allow
本
me
次
to
分论坛的
introduce
3位特邀
today's
嘉宾。
guest
顾问
speakers.
教授来自
Professor
北
Zhang
京理工
Xuan
大学世
from
纪
the
艺术
School
学
of
院，
Design and
戴
Arts,
守
Beijing
克先生
Institute of
来自安吉
Technology.
教育社
Jesse Cofino,
在本次
CEO
论
of
坛
NG
中，
Play.
3位嘉宾将分享研究实践的成
They
果，
will
同时
share
伴随
their
着人类
research
讨
and
论和观众问
practices,
答环
followed
节。
by a
在这里，
roundtable
我也想
discussion and
感谢
audience
各位
Q&A.
参会的观众们，
We'd like to encourage the audience
欢迎在
to
直播平台或者我们的微社群中分享
share
你的
your
看法
ideas and questions in our live streaming platform.
现场
Our
交流。
volunteers will
首先
collect the
让我们
questions
欢
for
迎
further
今天的首位
communication.
嘉宾研究团
Now
队
let's
有
move
请张
on
璇
to
讲者。
digital path of reshaping arts learning.
大家好，
Now
我
let's
是
give the
张
floor to
璇，
Zhang
来自
Xuan.
北京理工大学
Hello
设计与
everyone,
数学
this
院。
is Zhang
目前
Xuan
研究方向
from
包
the
括
School
艺
of
术教育
Design
信
and
息
Arts
化、
at Beijing
信息效
Institute
率
of
设计、 多
Technology.
元化艺术传
My
播。
research areas
目
include
前
the
因为经过
digitalization
各
of
方
art
面的精
education,
准方向的
interaction
一致
design, and
关系，
cross-cultural
也很关注
communication.
艺术教育的社会
So
面
I have
以及
always
艺术教育的课
focused
堂
deeply
教
on
育
social functions of art education and its relationship with the classroom context. And what role does technology play in all of this? How can we re-examine the relationship between teachers and students? How can we enable both teachers and students to unleash their creativity? How can we transform the traditional art classroom into a collaborative, creative experience? This is the topic I'd like to share with you. And at the end, I will share a real case study on information visualization in art education. So for traditional art education, it adopts a one-way knowledge transmission model. Teachers serve as authoritative knowledge providers, and learners only receive information passively. However, there is a lack of interaction and dialogue, and it cannot inspire children's creativity and critical thinking, and a standard assessment system can serve as a barrier for children to development in their artistic skills. Students tend to pursue the right answer instead of expressing their own emotions. In addition, traditional art education overlooks individual differences and diverse development paths. We all know that each student have their own talents and interests. They are from different cultural backgrounds and they have different personal experience. There is no one-size-fits-all curriculum for art education. So we've been thinking, how can we construct a more open, interactive art education model that respects individual differences? How can students engage in a more interactive art education practice? And how can the evaluation system serve comprehensive development of children? So now we are faced with many new technologies like AI, AR, and VR. Art education paradigm is faced with new challenges, and we need to redefine our role as art educators. First, I believe that we can get rid of our role as an instructor. Instead, we can become a guide to lead the children to think. This is important in art education because it can help children develop their abilities to solve problems. In addition, we should become collaborators and explore the world of art with students together. Of course, we can be learning facilitators to create conditions for students to learn, and we can innovate our teaching tools to make our teaching process more efficient. I always believe that truly effective education is a process of proactive exploration. We need to encourage personalized expression and creation, respect individual differences, and encourage them to create knowledge based on their own understanding. We should help them build personal connections and understandings of art, because art is not only a form of expression, it is a way of thinking. Through art education, we want learners to establish their connections with the world. And eventually, we hope that art education can create an environment for students to innovate and make attempts. For example, we can design a more flexible and adaptable design space and create a more inclusive atmosphere, encourage them to take risks so that students from different cultural backgrounds can feel accepted in the classroom. And that's how they can start a better dialogue and share their ideas with each other. We can adopt different art styles and the way of thinking. The differences should be considered as resources instead of obstacles. This is related to the case that I'm going to present. It is related to digital environment. Digital tools are bridges that can expand our vision. For example, now we have artificial intelligence that can break boundaries of time and space. It can link resources all over the world and provide new opportunities for art explorers. So here I'd like to share an example with you. It's a contemporary artwork data visualization, CADV, that I have created.
这里呢，先给大家看一下这个 CADV 的一角，留一个悬念。
So this is a small corner of CADV, and we will dive deeper into this image later. It consists of colored bubbles, which stand for corpus of different sizes. This design aims to explore how we can use technology in higher institute art education and break traditional methods of learning. Through this method, they can have a direct interaction with learning materials. They become agencies instead of passive receivers. And I also tribute to the concept of democratic learning. We combine visualization with art education to help students better understand and respond to the contemporary art education methods. So here are some background of the development of CADV. I was at Ohio State University, and I was teaching an undergraduate level digital art making class. And in the classroom, we were required to appreciate different categories of contemporary art and discuss relationship between social justice and art. The society is becoming more complicated, and contemporary art can serve as a mirror to reflect social realities and our understanding of our own identity. Contemporary art has provided our students with a powerful platform to understand the complexity of their own identities and understand the differences between identification. As art educators, we aim to help students understand the association between art and social justice. In the meantime, we create a secure space for students to discuss these complicated social problems. We hope that we can deploy visual art to express their focus on social problems, and we encourage students to participate in social dialogues through their own artworks. So this is a tool for us to guide the students when they focus on controversial topics in the society, and it can also serve as a buffer. So this is the main body of our research.
CADV 这个工具呢，它是在批判性多元文化主义的理论指导下，包含了有
CADV is guided by different social justice issues and what contemporary artists used to explain their art practices tackling social justice problems. It's supported by 3 databases. You might be quite familiar with Art21, the Art Story, and MoMA Online Collection. I chose the theme of social justice because there are 5 most controversial social topics, including ethnicity and race. Except for the 3 databases, we also chose some corpus that we have developed ourselves. So now let's take a closer look at how we explore and use CADV for both teaching and learning. So you can see the colored bubbles. Each of them represent some smaller keywords and corpus about different subcategories of social justice. So we can take a look at the pink bubble and the brown bubble. The advantage of CADV is that when we use it in class, if the students find that the existing keywords and topics are not added to the database, they can add the topics they are interested in themselves. For example, if we click on a bubble, it is related to race. CADV will search for all the keywords in the three databases we mentioned before. And we can see who are the artists who have created works related to the themes. And we can also cross-examine if these artists have created works related to other topics, for example, religion and disability. We can click on the image of the artist and go into their own page. And the students can scan the page and find the workpiece of the artist related to the topic. This is an autonomous choice of topics that they are interested in. The teachers don't need to tell them which keyword you can choose and how you can explore different artworks, because this is a democratic learning process and it's much more interesting to the students. In addition, this database can be used for teaching. Let's still take race as an example. The teachers and students can click on the bubble, and under each theme, there are rows of teachers. 20 most representative artists related to the topic of race are chosen. And for each of the artists, we have chosen their representative art pieces. There are links that students can use to scan. In our classrooms, we might also involve some installation, painting, and sculpture. So these are different categories of contemporary art, which allows us to further explore how different artists explore the relationship between contemporary art and social issues. So after we used this system in class, I would ask students to take some notes and write some reflective journals. And except for samples of student work, there are some works from teachers added to the database. And we would also conduct semi-structured interviews with teachers and experts. We would talk about the advantages and feasibility of CEDV. After our evaluation, we find that students have a preference for this color-oriented interaction. They can directly interact with the art pieces, which motivates them to learn about the art even more. In addition, we have established a buffer zone between students and the social problems. In the meantime, it helps them to be more motivated for extended studies. In the process of art creation, they are more willing to choose social justice topics that they are concerned about as their theme. So I'd like to show two of the artworks. It's designed by a white student. She always tells me that as a white person, I don't think I have a good stance to do art creation. I'm in no position to do this. However, after guiding them with the system of CADV, he used this approach of metaphor to create art. And after we use CADV as a teaching tool, the effect has been significantly improved. So as I just mentioned, we use this feedback approach to improve the CADV system. We use this feedback loop to collect feedback and revise CADV for further implementation in classrooms. So that's all for my speech today. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Zhang. Your work has shown us how digital technology can reshape art learning, and it has provided us with more insights into building virtual learning spaces. Now, let's give the floor to the last speaker, Mr. Jess Golfino from NG Play. He will talk about the origin, philosophy, and practices of NG education.
I want to thank all of you for joining us on your Sunday morning or Sunday evening. And thanks, and it's what an honor it is to share this space with Professor Guo and Professor Zhang. I think I'm interested to start by thinking about this larger question of what is art education? And I think this forces us to ask these larger questions of what is art and what is education. And I don't think we're going to be in a position to necessarily resolve or define those terms. But what I've heard from our speakers today are a number of interesting terms, this notion of life, of the body, of connection and description. And I think even in the title of this talk or of this panel, this idea of continuity and innovation, perhaps what we receive and kind of what we do with what we receive, introduces a notion of tension, of process over product, of safety and uncertainty, the individual, the group, what it means to receive and what it means to create, and then perhaps what it means to consider tradition and to think about innovation. So as I share about a very specific philosophy, a very specific approach, I'm not going to be directly resolving a question of what is art. I'm not going to necessarily be proposing a definition, but I'm going to largely share, and if you wouldn't mind bringing up my first slide, one specific time and place and how they contended with the idea of creation, expression, and child agency. Next slide, please. So in Anji County, China, which is in Zhejiang province, and I'm sure many of the audience are somewhat aware of the place, maybe not of the story of this educational innovation, but let's go to the next slide. In Anji County, known for bamboo and white tea production, and also the home of Miss Cheng Shui-Chin, who was born and raised in Anji County. She was educated in educational practice, early educational practice in the early 80s, and began first as a kindergarten teacher. And I use kindergarten in the Chinese context, Yuan, which means children ages 3 to 6. She began working at the county level and over time rose to a position what we in the West or in the United States might call the superintendent of early education. That put her in charge of all of the early childhood programming in her county. Next slide, please. And so now she takes on her position in the late 90s. And before 2001, this is kind of what it looked like in Anji County's. What they really had was 4 central kindergartens, what they described as a period of no play. And this might look very specific in terms of time and in terms of culture, but I've traveled to programs in Europe and America where children are still primarily focused on desk work, on sitting, on multiple transitions through activities that have been planned by the teacher or by the school for the enrichment of the child. Next slide, please. At the same time as Ms. Chung is taking on her role, there are significant policy changes happening at the national level in China. And I don't have the Chinese names of these policies, but some of you may be familiar with them. The Zhinan, Yoryuan, Zhinan, and that through these different policy iterations, a concept emerges. Next slide, please. That play should be the fundamental activity of the child and early childhood programs. 以有机为基本活动 became an idea that was popularized and expected in all public early childhood programs in China. So after 2001, Ms. Chung, and there's a larger story about how during the early 2000s, she built a network of 130 public kindergartens in Anji County, achieving universal attendance. So like 99% of children ages 3 to 6, 14,000 children were suddenly attending new schools that she had built within her county. They began to create play. They brought in natural materials. They brought in bamboo. They created rich, colorful environments. They created scenarios and centers for learning and engagement. But what Ms. Chung describes, Ms. Chung Shui-Chin describes, is entering her schools and seeing children smiling with their mouths and not with their eyes. There was tension between children and between teachers. There was a relationship of struggle. The children weren't actively, joyfully engaging with these materials that the teachers were winning awards for, that the parents and families were deeply engaged in creating. And so she began to ask herself a question. If play should be joyous and what's happening for my children is not joyous, then how are we defining play? Next slide, please. So she asked herself a question, and we can do this right now. What is your deepest, earliest, most joyous memory of play as a child? And she asked herself this question. She asked her teachers this question, her principals this question, and her families this question. And the results that they came, each person had a different experience of play, but there were shared qualities, a sense of time disappearing, a degree of physical risk, deep and uninterrupted engagement in an activity of the child's choice. Next slide. And so they decided is that if all of their experiences shared these qualities in common, deep and uninterrupted engagement, freedom, a sense of time disappearing, how are they going to create that for their children in their organized setting? So I'm going to share this video. We can take a look at it. We can think about it in terms of the child's experience, the teacher's decision-making, concepts of pedagogy, which we'll jump into in a minute, or just the notion of creation, expression, and child agency. So please, if you wouldn't mind playing this video. I'm not sure if there's a volume, if we can share. But I think we can just watch for right now. And so I think as we consider ideas of what is received, what do we do with it? What environments do we create? What is the value of product over process? How are we defining valuation in terms of the child's expressive or creative ability? And what really encourages or creates the conditions for children to engage with themselves, to engage with each other, to reach these buffers or boundaries or borders, both the unnatural spaces that are created between two areas or the areas that we're pushing past. I also want us to think about what we perceive as Chinese or as Western, as reflective of values that are received versus ideas that we would personally or as a group seek to encourage and cultivate in the learning and growth of the child or the learning and growth of our community. Because what I'd say is that oftentimes when people encounter the ideas that I'm about to share, they say, well, this is just like what we've seen in the West. This is like Montessori, or this is like Reggio, or this is like free child-centric education in the West. And what I'd say is I would challenge you to find many schools anywhere in the world that give children the time and the space and the materials to engage in this kind of agency and expression. But then let's think about what this means to do this on scale, that there are 500 children in the school, that each child has access to these experiences, and that every teacher within this approach is seeing what the child is doing in this moment as having value that is greater than or more central than the transmission of or the teaching of any particular outcome or result in the child's engagement. I think we can move to the next slide. I think there's a lot of videos that we have online that I'd encourage you to check out. These images go on for minutes, for half an hour. We can look at children who become children who are 3 or 4, deeply engaged in a process of creation and expression. So basically what the educators of Anji County came to is a conclusion that true play, 真游戏, is deep and uninterrupted engagement in the activity of your choice. And so in their creation of an ecosystem, a pedagogical, a curricular, a philosophical ecosystem around education, it began with the understanding that this definition of play is the basis of children's meaningful experiences of learning, and that everything else is built around understanding the child's experience of this experience. Next slide, please. So I'm going to share with you a few key concepts in the Anji Play approach. I think the first and most important thing to understand is that there are basic principles. Next slide, please. 5 interconnected principles which allow for the creation of an educational ecosystem. Love, which means safety, which means having one's needs responded to. And young children need to move. They need agency. They need to take risks. And when I say risks, I mean doing something with an uncertain outcome based on a prediction. And so that could be climbing or building something that seems physically risky. A risk could also be connecting 2 concepts for the first time, taking a social risk, risking one's sense of certainty about a particular idea. And so risk and love, safety, being seen, heard, trusted, having consistent, responsive environments. Love is an experience that children experience in this approach, but also that educators experience. By saying to the educator, You create environments where children are deeply engaged, and we trust you to be able to be present, to be able to observe and reflect upon and seek to understand the child on their terms. That is both taking a risk, that is embracing uncertainty, but that's also safety in showing trust to the educator. When children do something with uncertain outcomes based on a prediction in a fundamentally safe and responsive environment, that is most often experienced as joy. And now joy can look like boisterous laughter, or it can look like close individual focus and concentration on a particular activity. Joy, the truest measure of quality in an early childhood program. Engagement, the sense of connection and flow that comes from experiences of joy. And then reflection. And that's what differentiates Anji Play from many approaches to education. Many pedagogies, many philosophies, is that if children are reflecting and educators are reflecting, practices evolve based on what is observed and what is understood as the child's understanding and needs. Next slide, please. I know we have very little time. So stepping back and being present, being aware of and being responsive to children's experience without seeking to guide them in any particular direction. Next slide, please. Recording and reflecting on play, a stance of discovery on the part of the educator, a true, authentic admission and understanding that we as adults cannot understand what a child is learning in any particular moment, and that if we take time to observe and reflect, we can gain a deeper understanding of children. And that stance, that approach, and those practices in and of themselves are an expression of love, because they show a commitment to listening to and understanding the child's experience and the meaning and value that it has for the child. Next slide, please. And therefore, listening to children and collecting their stories is a central aspect of this practice. Next slide, please. Making changes to the environment and materials based on our observation and reflection, based on our true commitment to understanding to and responding to children's actual needs. Next slide, please. Knowledge of children and the child. So based on our taking a step back and seeking to understand the child by being humble and saying that we're uncertain about what they're capable of, we have an approach that is based on obtaining a knowledge of children and the child. Next slide, please. And so I want to just focus in. I know we have a couple minutes left, and I want to thank you all for your patience and our interpreter for dealing with the speed of my sharing. What does it mean to think about creation and expression in these settings? Next slide. First, that play is in and of itself a creative and expressive process. Next slide, please. In Anji Play, the child takes the lead. And so whether that is in their experience of play or in their experiences of expression and reflection in the classroom or in transitions, it is the child that is taking the lead. Next step, please. Listening. So if we are in a stance of, and we create environments that are focused on listening to the child's voice and story, their expression of their own experience, their selection of a means to express their experience is given primacy. That is what's most important to us as educators seeking to support the child's emerging ability to experience and then express their experience. Next slide, please. Unhindered connection to the natural world. And so you can see this image of a child that is directly in connection with the world around them. And I think this, similarly to listening to the child's voice and creating open-ended, safe environments, allows a child to have a sense of continuity, of connection, of being responsive to place and time and culture. Next slide, please. Not based on existing forms or models. So unlike in environments where children are being taught particular forms that they're imitating, in the Anji Play approach, even when we get inside the classroom and children are engaged in what might be more traditionally described as art classes, children are not presented with forms for imitation. Next slide, please. In that, children explore, they share what's important and meaningful with each other. Next slide, please. Children then learn from each other. Next slide, please. And that in order to create these environments, materials are abundant and environments are free of constraints. And we can go into more detail about what that means in practice and how that also reflects culture. But as you can see in this image and many other images, there's no sense of a hindrance between the child's desire and need to express and to interact and the plasticity of the environment and the materials at their disposal. Next slide, please. Time, space, and materials for the child to reflect. And so I think if we think about the physical space or the digital space, I think we think about to what extent is the digital space part of our physical reality. But I think time is a very important aspect of our freedom and our safety to have agency in expression, and our agency as educators to be present for and responsive to children's meaningful and authentic expression. Next slide, please. And there are spaces and times in the Anji Play approach that are devoted to art. but again, where children take the lead and where forms are not presented for imitation, where children are given access to abundant materials. Next slide, please. And books and literature are selected materials and environments that reflect local culture. Next slide, please. Books and literature selected for and by children. So this is not a setting that is free from or divorced from the need for children to learn, to have access to resources, and to reflect on and interpret their own experiences of reading and engaging in narration. Next slide, please. So the hand, the eye, the voice of the child is present throughout. If you look at walls, if you look at hallways in an Anji Play school, it is the voice of the child and not of that of the teacher or of forebearers or of educators, but it's really the child who we're hearing and seeing in the environment. Next slide, please. So I think in Anji Play, the question really of arts education is not how do we teach art, but really how do we create conditions that allow the child to explore the full range of expression and creation that is meaningful to the child. And then in our work, how are we creating environments that allow children to have deeply meaningful experiences? Because that will be reflected in their expression. So the last slide would be to invite you all to check out, next slide, please, our Instagram, our website. I just want to thank you so much. That's a drawing that my daughter did of me reading when she was 7 years old. And yeah, I just want to, again, appreciate your time and attention. I look forward to our conversation.
I believe that today's dialogue has inspired all of you, and I believe you have all learned something. Again, I'd like to sincerely thank the 3 guest speakers today. You have expanded the boundaries of art education, and you have provided us with an opportunity to rethink art education. I appreciate the participation of the audience too. Your feedback has made this panel more meaningful. I'd like to thank the volunteers who make this communication possible. And after today's discussion, I'm more certain that art education is not about techniques. It's about connecting to the world and other people. It is not a privilege of the minority. It should be inseparable for everyone as they grow up. Let's continue exploring the possibilities of art education and make it a bridge between the world ourselves and the society. I'd like to thank the co-host and guest speakers of the panel. This brings our panel to an end. Please continue to follow us. We will have another panel of education technology. Thank you.